Today is taking that piece, which is what I call the back plate or back band. I'm going to be putting it in there, stitching it in. It's going to be connecting these two sides on the inside of the elbow. We're going to get a damp first. I've already pre-punched my holes, as I have stated before. So, I'm doing that. And the other thing, we're just going to bring this old guy up. So this fellow is the very first one of this particular style that I did. And I worked it out that I made this one about 31 years ago. So as you can see, there's slight variations on what I've done over the years, but it's basically the same elbow that I've been producing, and I've been wearing this one successfully and safely for all that time. So there's a little bit of a variation on it, simply because it's the joy of using leather, is you can do variations on a theme. So, but yeah, this was the very first one I did of this particular pattern, and I did that 31 years ago. I'm still living in Calgary, so it's still pretty tough. Stitching is all holding up pretty well. Slight variation on the way it's attached to the forearm. Basically the same. I wear my particular one without the lames, but again, the lames fit in pretty easily, as you can tell. That's the paper one, right? So that's how they go together. So yeah, 31 years. 31 years I've been making this. I've been doing armor for about 40, actually. So, or leather armor. So I'm going to take the plate. Again, we're going to Sam it a little bit, so I'm just going to put it over here in the water, which is off camera at the moment. Take a little bit of moisture out of it. And again, I just get it a little bit damp, just in order to make it a little easier to work into the piece. So, got that. I'm going to grab my needle here. There we go. I've probably got enough thread there for the first pass anyway. So again, we're going to do this exactly the same way we did the other one. Finding our hole. And what this does too is it gives us basically a double reinforce on our thread count on our seam, which gives it a little more, again, a little more strength, because there will be some wear and tear on that edge. Okay, burying our thread, here we go. It's hard to see what I'm doing because I know that with this limb of the elbow in the way, kind of hard. Now sometimes what will happen is the needle will get a little sticky. I mean, you're putting a lot of thread through those holes, and eventually what's going to happen is you might have a little bit of binding. So I do have a set of assisting pliers here in case I have to work to pull those through. So don't be afraid to use that. Just remember that you could break your needle if you pull on it too hard. There we go. So each part of this, each operation, as you can see, it's about 15 minutes for me. Now it may vary for you, depending on your experience level and what it is you're doing. And of course, we're not including the times we're not letting the camera run while this stuff, say, dries out, because that can sometimes take a couple of hours. Patience. Overall, an elbow like this kind of about an hour and a half maybe in total work time, not including the periods of time that we give it to dry and to settle out. So with each piece for me, you're dealing with about an hour for this, again, this level of detail. if I was to make it more more detailed, of course that's going to take more time. I don't know, grab this guy. Say if you're going to do something tooled as detailed as say this dragon is on this arm bracer, that's going to take a little more time than just say drawing lines on your leather. That's just goes without saying. So try to budget your time, try to think about what it is you want to accomplish, what the piece is going to be used for. Again, thinking of leather as more like clay helps a lot. So just working my way along, trying not to take a needle and put it through my finger, which would be painful and bloody, and you know, we're going to be dyeing the leather later. Oops, I missed. Yeah. Helps if you hit the hole. I'm grabbing a needle, pulling it through. Now, the other thing too, you may have heard me mention earlier that I use dull needles. One, yes, they tend not to cut me too bad, so I don't tend to leak as much on my pieces. The other thing too, I find that if I use sharper needles, what'll happen is, if I do miss the hole by a little bit, I won't really know, and then all of a sudden I'm trying to push my way through the leather, and that can cause all sorts of problems. I can also get myself caught up in the thread in a way that I'm not happy about, which leads to complications. So these upholstery needles, dull needles, tend to work just fine for this. I prefer needles that are a little bit flexible, so not so hard. I do go through quite a few over a course of a year, but I try really hard to make them last. And also, if I do happen to break one off, I will just simply, because they're dull, if it breaks off somewhere in here, where's this little guy here? Like this guy, he got broken off, so I just took him downstairs, gave him a little bit of a sanding on one of my machines, and then I cleaned up the tip and polished it, and it gave me a nice little short needle. So I'll keep reusing them for as long as I possibly can. You'll also notice I'm not using a wax thread. I'm just using a straight up, non-color, just tan thread. Reason being that if I wanted to wax it, I would probably just run it through a chunk of my beeswax. If I was using an application, in this, that didn't require Curboli or wax hardening. In this case, that's what I'm going to be doing, is I will be wax hardening this piece after. And so it seems kind of counterproductive. I mean, I don't find that the wax thread travels through any easier through the holes that I've created. And in fact, for the expense, it just isn't worth it. Okay, we're almost coming to the end of this first pass. So it'll be 3 times that long, so I'll do a couple, because I'm just going to go back and forth on this one until it's closed up. The other thing to think about too, because with these ones you've noticed that I've only got the one additional layer, so I've cut the void and put another plate on top. If you want, again, you're not limited to that. I could actually, if I wanted to, say, put another void with some more tooling on this, so that would actually bring it out, you know, another level of detail further. So that you would add in, of course, to your time. That would also give you a little more strength through this area. Again, it's totally up to you and what you want to do. again, I'm just using the pliers just as a demonstration as to how they work. I use it. Those are pretty big, clumsy pliers. You could use needle nose. In a lot of cases, my poor old arthritic fingers are just not quite strong enough to pull it all the way through. Sometimes, and for speed, I'll just use that. Okay, coming up on the top here, and I'm just going to double back. Another thing about using a set of pliers is the fact that it just sometimes it's just not worth the aggravation of having to struggle with your fingers in there. It just reaches in a lot easier. It really helps to make sure that the holes are lining up. Now again, like I said, with this is a narrower band. You can see how much narrower this is than the overplate on the outside. Okay? You can also see that once I get it done, how much that's going to restrict the movement. I mean, you can see how big a gap, I don't know if you can see that past my fingers, how big a gap that is. This is going to lock that in and hold it in place and give you just that little bit more protection and hopefully longevity, because if this is pulling back and forth a lot, what's going to happen is those threads eventually are going to worry their way through, and they won't do their job anymore. Your piece will start to break over time. So, working your way through quickly. A very basic band too. If you wanted to, you could scallop the edges of your band. You could make it more decorative. You could tool it if you wanted to. I mean, the limitation is your time and your imagination, what it's worth to you. Oops. See, I keep getting caught up in my own work. So don't feel bad when you do. Everybody does. Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to finish this piece off. And then in the next segment, what we're going to do is we will trim these pieces off, these tabs, the tabs on the top and bottom. Tailor these a little bit, mark them for the holes that we're going to need, because what we're going to want to do is take this piece, and this piece is going to overlap down onto here. So we're going to be cutting this down a little bit narrower at the top, so you can see it here probably a little bit. You can see it in there, how it narrows down. Of course, that'll be it. Okay, so take my knot out. See that? It happens, but that just pops right out. Okay.